Could you imagine the absolute madness of sitting down to watch the biggest football game of the entire year with $4.5 million riding on the result? $4.5 million. That's 4 to 5 houses with a fleet of luxury cars. That is unlimited lifetime supply of bad decisions at the casino. But for Billy Waters, this was just another Sunday. Billy just isn't another gambler. This guy cracked the code to sports betting. He is one of the greatest sports bettors of our entire generation and of all time. He became super rich from sports betting and had Vegas sweating anytime he stepped in the casino or the sports books. In this video, we're gonna dive into the mind of Billy Waters. Not only what makes him different, but what we can actually learn from his approach and how we can adapt it into our approach to ultimately help us make more money from sports bet. As a full-time sports bettor myself, I'll be breaking down his mindset, breaking down his insights, and sprinkling a couple hard-earned lessons that I have also learned in a bid to hopefully help you bet smarter, think smarter, and ultimately make more money. So let's get into the video.
This is not a simple thing as like, oh, I follow sports, I think Kansas City's gonna win. It's not. It's complicated, very, very complicated. And to win at a level that you won at over your career, and the numbers, like what is the biggest bet you ever placed?
I bet $4.5 million on New Orleans to beat the Indianapolis Colts in the Super Bowl. That's the biggest bet I ever placed.
Did you win?
I did. I won it. I got lucky and I won it.
This is very interesting to me. You know, he bet $4.5 million on a game, and he's going to speak about it in a minute, but he said that he's lucky to win that bet. But the reason he put $4.5 million on it was because he believed he had the biggest edge that he had ever had before. But just him acknowledging that he got lucky is the sign of a wise man. In sports betting, it's all about luck. It's simultaneously not about luck at all and all about luck. It's a paradox like most things in the universe. Anything can happen in a sports bet. Anything can happen in a sports game. So you have to acknowledge that on every win, there is always a little bit of luck baked into it.
The reason I had such a big bet is what I do, Joe, is I make a line on a game myself. My prediction of what I feel like the differential should be.
Independent of what the experts
Completely
say.
Independent. I don't even look at her line when I make my line.
Really?
No.
That's high level shit.
Well, that's all. I'm doing the same thing they're doing.
Right.
I mean, believe me, the principles that I'm following and making my line are the same principles that the handicapper is making. But it's Joe, it's kind of like baking a cake, you know. One guy might put a little bit more flour in than the other guy does. And so that's how we end up with different, lines.
So here Billy says that when he's researching handicapping for a sports bet, what he does is he makes his own betting line. He doesn't even look at the bookmaker's line. He makes his own betting line. And I do think this is the best approach to take. You know, from time to time, I do look at the bookmaker's betting line. It's kind of tough not to because people will send them to me. As soon as the line's released, oftentimes I'll see it on social media. So it is hard for me to completely avoid these lines. But I do think the best approach to take when you're handicapping is to completely disregard the bookmaker's line. Make your own line because you're not going to be biased based on the bookmaker's line. I mean, oftentimes you'll get a line that comes out that says the bookmaker put a fighter or a team at -300. And instantly your mind is like, no, they shouldn't be a -300 favorite. But if you actually did your line yourself, you might line them -280, -290. So, it's very close. But yeah, what you should be doing is making your own lines independent of the bookmaker's lines, comparing those lines together. And if there's a difference in those lines in your favor, that's when you place the bet.
And then what happens is, the larger the differential between the number they make and my opinion, the larger bet I make. There has to be a minimum of a certain amount of separation or I won't make a bet. But the larger the difference is between my opinion and their opinion, the larger bet I make.
So yeah, this is like common sports betting knowledge and you don't have to do it this way, but basically what Billy is saying is the bigger edge he has, the bigger bet he makes. If you think a team should be -300 and they're +100, that should be a massive bet for you, according to Billy and, the standard sports betting industry's bankroll management and unit staking structure. And I definitely agree with it as well. There is a place for flat staking, we won't go into that at the moment, but I do agree, the larger the edge, the bigger bet you should make. And this is basically what I've followed for the last 7 than 8 years.
Well, the New Orleans game you asked me about, which I couldn't believe was a Super Bowl game. And this type of year, we never get this kind of differential. But I had like a 7-point differential between the line I made and the line they made.
Really?
They made Indianapolis 7, and I thought the game should be pick'em. When I saw the line, I couldn't believe it. I went back. I said, well, maybe I haven't made a mistake here. I went back, redid it. No, pick'em. So that's how I ended up with such a large bet.
So yeah, this is when Billy made his $4.5 million bet on the Super Bowl, which was his biggest bet ever. So he thought the game should be pick'em, but there was a handicap of 7, so he ended up making a massive bet. You know, I can relate this back to a bet that I had earlier this year. It's actually one of the biggest bets I've ever made. It was on Peyton Talbot at -110 against Cameron Simon. Like I said, this fight was -110, but I lined the fight -300 to Peyton Talbot. I had about $80,000 on him. I had him at varying lines, I think -105 to like -120 or something, but returned about $70,000. And this because it was a massively large differential in my line and the bookmaker's line. So I placed a big bet on it. Now, it wasn't quite the 4.5 million that Billy Waters placed, but it was my 4.5 million at 80 grand. Peyton ended up winning that fight, knockout in round 2. And he did look -300 as well. It was a very satisfying bet for me, probably the most satisfying of my sports betting career.
Before the internet, what kind of research are you getting? Like, how are you getting research on NFL teams or boxers or anything, whatever you're gambling on?
Well, prior to the internet, some of the information today that you get off your smartphone was golden. I mean, I used to have a crew of guys when I first moved to Las Vegas in '82. We would send them out to the airport, and we had relationships with the various airlines, and we would be able to get the newspapers that came off of all the planes that flew into Las Vegas, and they were filled with local sports stories that were, written by that local sports writer, and then we bring them back, and we had readers who read those stories, and anything that they read in one of those stories that they felt like was material to that particular game, it would be passed along to the handicapper. And today, you can read 1,000 newspapers online and get that same information.
So this is an example of an edge, right? Back in the day, the edges looked a lot different than they look now, although they can still look similar because inside information is still a massive edge in sports betting. But Billy is saying that he basically used to get newspapers that weren't released in Vegas yet, so the bookmakers didn't have these newspapers, but he did, and the newspapers contained stories that gave him an edge over those bookmakers. Now, it's funny because on the one hand, I'm thinking, damn, I wish I was born in this time because it seems so easy, right? It's easy to get an edge over the bookmakers because there's no internet. At the same time, it's a negative because that's a big ass operation, having to have relationships with these airlines to get these newspapers. So while it's kind of simple, it's not easy, right? It's simple what you have to do, but it's not easy. Whereas now, all of this information I'm getting from my phone. But the issue is so many other people, right? The entire market is getting this information as well. So it's always pros and cons in sports betting. The most comparable method I have to this method is basically networking again. So I have relationships with people all over the world, to be honest, mainly in Australia, America, UK, and New Zealand, who are close to people in big fight camps. And so if a fighter is injured or if a fighter is not showing up to practice or whatever it may be, I will get that information. That's information I can use in my gambling. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to instantly make me win a bet. A fighter could be injured in camp and still go out there and win in the first round. MMA is extremely volatile, as we know. But a little takeaway is that any edge you can get, aka any inside information that you can get that the bookies can't get or that the market or most of the market won't get, that shit is gold dust, and you need to be using that as much as possible. That's why networking is so important. If you remember, I said there's many different reasons to network, not only to get new ideas, but one of the reasons is also to get information, insider information. So Billy was doing it from the newspapers. I'm sure he was doing it in 100 different ways as well. But just have a think, is there any way you can get some inside information on news of injuries or strategies from the sports teams or anything like that? Because if there is, it could be gold dust and give you the edge that you need to beat the bookmakers.
How many times have you watched a football game and you'll see the score? It wasn't indicative at all of what the score should have been. So let's say, receiver's going down the field and he doesn't have anybody within 20 yards of him, and he gets thrown a perfect pass, he just drops it. He was unlucky. He should have had that pass. On the other hand, let's say he's going down the field and we had a pass like that in the playoffs when San Francisco was playing Detroit. They threw a ball and it hit a helmet, ricocheted, and ended up in a real long completion and a touchdown. That was lucky. Okay, so when we look at the box score, we look at the yardage, we take that off. Okay. You know, there's plays that happen in the NFL when you look at box scores. As far as we're concerned, they're misleading.
All right, this is absolute gold dust here, and this is why Billy is one of the best in sports betting history. So he's basically saying that you cannot only look at stats or outcomes of a game because they don't tell the full picture. So you really need to do your due diligence on exactly what happened in that game, not just the result of the game, because it will determine how you view the next games and where you place your bets. I can relate this back to MMA very heavily because if you look at a lot of fighters' records, you will be heavily misled. One that's literally just come off the top of my mind right now is a fighter called Matthew Semelsberger, who's in the UFC. So if you look at his record in the UFC, I think he has 1 knockout, right? But if you actually watch his fights, the guy literally knocks down almost every one of his opponents, right? He hurts almost every one of his opponents. Max Griffin is another one. I mean, this guy hurts almost every one of his opponents and he's got hardly any knockouts. Now, if you didn't actually go back and watch those fights and watched every minute of the fight, you would never know that Max Griffin has a lot of power in his hands. You wouldn't know that, right? Because you would just think, oh, the guy always wins decisions. He's going to win another decision or lose by decision or whatever it may be. So understanding the intricacies of whatever sport you're betting and actually watching tape, researching the entire game, the entire fight, the entire match, whatever it may be, is often a lot more important than just going on stats. Now, it is different in some of the major sports. Like, I believe MMA watching tape is way more important than a sport, for example, like NFL. You can definitely use stats and models a lot more in NFL. But at the end of the day, if you want to be at the top of the game, you're seeing what people like Billy Waters are doing. They're not just looking at stats. They're looking at each individual play and how those stats came to be. And he's also acknowledging there is so much luck that is involved in the stats, that it's more important to look at the overall meta of the game or the match that you're researching rather than the outcome. And it's the exact same in results of bets. You know, plenty of times I've made amazing bets and the outcome is that they've lost or I've lost a bet for whatever reason, but it's not so much about the outcome, it's more about the process and what actually happened that led up to the outcome. This is an advanced sports betting tactic and very important to be aware of. So that's a little sneak peek into the life of Billy Waters, how he rose to fame, and some of the techniques he uses in his own betting strategy. I hope I broke it down well for you, and hopefully you can use some of his techniques to make more money yourself. If you want to know more about me, you can hit the links in the bio, and if you like videos like this, give me a like, give me a subscribe, give me a comment on what type of videos you want to see in the future, and I'll break them down for you and hopefully help you make some more money. Good luck in your bets. I'll see you in the next one.